Picture this. It's 1994. You walk into a Blockbuster Video on a Friday night. You want to rent The Lion King. The guy behind the counter says, "Sorry, we only have that at our store on Fifth Avenue. This is the 42nd Street location. You'd have to drive over there, fill out a new membership form and pick it up in 3 to 5 business days." You'd think that was insane, right? But here's the thing, that's exactly what's happening with your money right now, every single day, across the entire planet, and most people have absolutely no idea. Today I want to take you somewhere most financial content never goes. Not into the weeds of trading charts, not into price predictions, and definitely not into the get-rich-quick rabbit hole. Instead, I want to zoom out, way out, and show you something that I believe is one of the most underappreciated technological shifts happening on Earth right now. And when you see it clearly, you'll understand why some of the smartest institutions on the planet are quietly repositioning themselves around it. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the way you think about money is going to change. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually thought about what happens when you send money to someone? Most of us think of it like this: you tap your phone, the money moves, done, simple. But here's what's actually happening behind the scenes, and it's going to make your jaw drop. When a business in Chicago needs to pay a supplier in Vietnam, that payment doesn't travel in a straight line. It doesn't go directly from one bank to the other. Instead, it gets handed off sometimes 2, 3, 4, or even 5 different intermediary banks, each one taking a small cut, each one logging its own records, each one adding time to the process. That single payment can take anywhere from 2 to 5 business days to settle, and the fees, they can eat up anywhere from 3% to 10% of the total transaction, depending on the currency, the country, and the path it takes. Now think about how staggering that is. Global remittance flows, that's just individuals sending money across borders, exceeded $800 billion in a single recent year. If even 5% of that is being eaten by fees and friction, we're talking about $40 billion every year that just evaporates. Gone, not into a product, not into a service, just absorbed by the machinery of a financial system that was built before the internet even existed. That's not a minor inefficiency. That's a structural flaw. And the people who feel it most aren't Fortune 500 companies. They're a nurse in the Philippines sending money back to her family, a construction worker in Dubai wiring money to his kids in Pakistan, a small manufacturer in Ghana trying to pay a supplier in Germany. The system that was supposed to connect the global economy is actually taxing the most vulnerable people in it. And that is the problem that a new generation of financial infrastructure is being built to solve. Now here's why this doesn't feel urgent to most people in developed countries. You don't feel the friction. Think about your home's plumbing. You turn on the tap, water comes out, cold, hot, whatever you need. You don't think about the pipes. You don't think about the pressure systems, the treatment facilities, the miles of underground infrastructure that make that water appear like magic in your kitchen. But what if you lived in a place where getting water meant walking 2 miles to a well, carrying a heavy jug back home, and doing it again tomorrow? Suddenly, the plumbing isn't invisible anymore. Suddenly, it's the most important thing in your world. That's the global financial system right now, in 2 different realities. If you're in the United States or Western Europe, you turn on the tap, money flows, you barely notice the cost, you barely notice the delay. But if you're one of the 1.4 billion adults on Earth who are unbanked, you're carrying the jug. Now what if someone came along and said, what if we replaced all of that legacy plumbing with something that could move value the way the internet moves information? Instantly, cheaply, anywhere. That's the conversation that's happening right now, and most people are sleeping through it. I want to give you a historical frame for what's coming because I think it helps put everything in perspective. In 1956, a trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean invented the standardized shipping container. Before that, loading a ship was a nightmare. Hundreds of dock workers would manually move individual crates, boxes, and barrels, each a different size and shape, one by one, into a cargo ship's hull. It took days, it was expensive, it was inefficient. McLean's container standardized everything. Same size, same corners, same locking mechanism. Suddenly a crane could load thousands of units in hours instead of days. Ships could hold more. Ports could process more. Costs collapsed. And the downstream effects? They reshaped the entire global economy. Manufacturing moved to wherever it was cheapest because shipping costs dropped so dramatically that geography became almost irrelevant. Some economists credit the shipping container with doing more for global trade than any trade agreement in the 20th century. Now here's my question. What is the equivalent of the shipping container for money? Right now, moving value internationally is exactly like the pre-container era of shipping. Every currency is a different sized crate. Every bank is a different dock worker. Every correspondent banking relationship is a new port with new rules. The standardization that's coming through technologies like digital assets designed specifically to bridge these incompatible financial systems is the shipping container moment for global money movement. And just like McLean's invention, once it's implemented, the downstream effects are going to reshape things we can't fully predict yet. Okay, let's get into the actual mechanism here, but I'm going to do it in a way that won't make your eyes glaze over. Imagine you've got two massive water tanks on opposite sides of a mountain. One tank is in Japan, full of yen. One tank is in Brazil, full of reais. Someone in Japan needs to send value to someone in Brazil. Under the current system, you'd have to physically pump water from Japan's tank through a series of pipes maintained by different companies, each charging a toll over the mountain, and eventually into Brazil's tank. This takes days. The tolls add up. Sometimes water gets lost in the pipes. Now imagine instead that there's a neutral liquid, a bridge asset that can flow through a single universal pipeline instantly. The Japanese side converts yen into this bridge liquid. The bridge liquid flows across the mountain in 4 seconds. The Brazilian side converts it back into reais. No correspondent banks, no multi-day waiting periods, no 3% fees disappearing into the system. That bridge asset, a neutral, fast-settling, deeply liquid digital token, is one of the core roles that assets like XPRP are designed to fill in the architecture of next-generation financial infrastructure. And crucially, this isn't some fringe startup's fever dream. The frameworks being built around this, like ISO 20022, the new global messaging standard for financial transactions, are being implemented right now by institutions that move trillions of dollars. The infrastructure is being laid, whether most people are watching or not. I want to share a moment that reframed this entire topic for me. A few years back, I was talking to someone who runs a mid-sized textile business. They manufacture in Southeast Asia and sell to buyers in Europe and North America. Smart operator, been in business for decades. I asked him offhandedly what his biggest operational headache was. Without hesitating, he said, cash flow, always cash flow. I pushed him, wasn't the manufacturing the hard part? The logistics? He shook his head. We make the goods, we ship the goods, our buyer receives them. And then we wait sometimes 30, 45, 60 days for a wire that takes 3 more days to clear, minus whatever the bank stake. My capital is frozen. I can't start the next order until the previous one settles. So I either take out expensive short-term loans to bridge the gap, or I miss opportunities. That's not a story about crypto. That's a story about a fundamental inefficiency in how value moves between people who have already agreed to exchange it. Now imagine that payment settles in 4 seconds instead of 4 days, at a fraction of a penny in cost, with full confirmation on both sides. He wouldn't need the loan. His capital wouldn't be frozen. He could turn orders faster. He could take on more clients. He could grow his business. Multiply that story by 400 million small and medium-sized businesses around the world, which account for 90% of all businesses globally and more than 50% of all employment, and you start to understand the scale of what faster, cheaper value transfer unlocks. This isn't a niche improvement, it's infrastructure that touches virtually every corner of the global economy. Here's an economic concept that most people haven't heard of, but once you understand it, the stakes of all of this become crystal clear. It's called the velocity of money. In simple terms, it's a measure of how quickly money circulates through an economy. How many times does the same dollar get spent, earned, and spent again within a given period? When velocity is high, economic activity is high. When money moves fast, more value is created because that same unit of currency is doing more work, enabling more transactions, more production, more trade. And here's the insight that stops most people cold when I share it. Every friction in the current financial system, every fee, every delay, every failed transaction, every bank holiday that pauses a wire is a drag on the velocity of money. It's a governor on the engine of global commerce. Now think about what happens when you remove those frictions. Money doesn't just move faster. The entire economy begins to move faster. Businesses cycle their capital more quickly. Workers get paid more frequently, potentially daily or even hourly instead of bi-weekly. Entrepreneurs in emerging markets can access global trade more easily. Microtransactions that were previously uneconomical because no one wants to pay a $15 wire fee to move $20 suddenly become possible. It's not just that things get a little cheaper, it's that entirely new categories of economic activity become possible that weren't before. The economists who've modeled this argue that meaningful friction reduction in global payments could add trillions of dollars to global GDP over the next decade. Not because anyone invented something new to sell, but because value that was already being created could finally move to where it was needed, faster and with less waste. That's the scale of what we're talking about. Now I know what some of you are thinking right now. Okay, but I've heard this before. Crypto guys have been saying this stuff for years. Where's the actual adoption? That's a fair challenge, and I want to address it seriously. Here's the honest truth: the adoption curve for financial infrastructure is nothing like the adoption curve for consumer apps. When a new social media platform launches, it can go from 0 to 100 million users in 18 months because the barrier to entry is basically zero. Financial infrastructure is the opposite. It is glacially slow by design, and that's not a bug. It's a feature. When you're talking about systems that move trillions of dollars, you need regulatory approval in dozens of jurisdictions. You need compliance frameworks. You need years of stress testing. You need every major institution involved to trust the technology, and institutional trust is measured in years, not months. The SWIFT network, the messaging system that underlies most international bank transfers today, was founded in 1973. It took decades before it was the default standard. But here's what's different now: the regulatory environment, which was previously a wall, is beginning slowly, deliberately to open up. Multiple central banks around the world are exploring digital currency frameworks. International settlement bodies are migrating to new messaging standards. Major financial institutions that were publicly dismissive of digital assets 5 years ago are now operating dedicated blockchain divisions. The wheels are turning. They're just turning the way massive financial infrastructure turns, deliberately, carefully, and largely out of public view. The question isn't really will this happen. At this point, the question is how quickly and who will benefit most from being positioned early. Let me bring this back down to ground level for a minute. Think about your paycheck. In most of the world, you work for 2 weeks and then you get paid. Why 2 weeks? Why not weekly? Why not daily? The answer is almost entirely about the friction of payment systems. Processing payroll is expensive and administratively complex, so companies batch it. They pay less frequently because it's cheaper and easier to do it that way. Now imagine the friction drops to near zero. Suddenly there's no operational reason why you couldn't receive your pay at the end of every shift, or even as you earn it. Incrementally, in real time. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, this isn't a minor convenience. It's potentially life-changing. The difference between getting paid on Friday and needing money on Wednesday can mean a predatory payday loan with a 300% annualized interest rate. It can mean overdraft fees. It can mean not being able to buy groceries. Real-time value transfer doesn't just make rich people's transactions faster. It removes the hidden tax that financial friction places on people with the least buffer in their lives. Or consider this: international students, expats, and immigrant workers who send money home currently pay, on average, 6 to 7% in fees per transaction. On a $300 remittance, that's $18 to $21 gone just for the privilege of moving your own money. For a family living on that remittance, that's a week's worth of food, a portion of the school fees, a doctor's visit. When the infrastructure shifts, those fees compress towards zero. That money stays with the family. These are the human stakes underneath what sounds like a dry technological story. I want to zoom out one final time. Every major era of human economic history has been defined by a fundamental advance in how value was transferred. Barter gave way to commodity money, gold, silver, grain, because it was more efficient. Commodity money gave way to paper currency because carrying gold across trade routes was dangerous and impractical. Paper currency gave way to bank transfers and then to digital ledgers because physical cash was inefficient at scale. And now, for the first time in decades, we are on the threshold of another fundamental shift, from fragmented, expensive, slow settlement systems to something that operates more like the internet, borderless, near instant, open. Each of these transitions, when they happened, seemed inevitable in retrospect. But while they were happening, there were always skeptics who said the old system worked fine, who said the new system was a solution looking for a problem, who said the timing was wrong or the risks were too high, and every single time the friction reduction won. Because efficiency wins, it always wins. Not in a straight line, not on a predictable timeline, but in the arc of economic history, systems that move value better than their predecessors eventually replace them. We are watching that arc bend right now, in real time. So the next time someone asks you skeptically, dismissively, but what does this actually do? Here's your answer. It does what electricity did for manufacturing, what container shipping did for global trade, what the internet did for communication. It removes the friction from the movement of value. And when that friction drops, the velocity of money increases, economic activity expands, opportunities that were previously closed off by geography, cost, or access open up. That's not hype. That's not a prediction based on hopeful speculation. That is the logical consequence of infrastructure improvements playing out in exactly the way they always have throughout economic history. You don't have to take anyone's word for it, you just have to look at the pattern. The question isn't whether the world's financial plumbing is going to get rebuilt. The blueprint is already drawn. The workers are already on site. The question is whether you understand what's being built and what that means for everything that comes after. If this gave you a new way to think about what's happening in the financial world right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your questions or your perspective in the comments below. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.